Hey everybody, today's video is about the entropy system, and I was inspired to make this because a lot of the discussion I've seen about defenses coming up in 3.16 Scourge surrounding the changes have been misleading with respect to how the entropy system works and what the implications of it are, and comparing it to dodge and things like that. And so I wanted to clear up these misconceptions, but I also just want to kind of go into a more general overlook of how it works and what the implications of a system like this are, and compare it to a purely chance-based system. And then we'll go ahead and make some connections to Scourge League, and not just the entropy system, but being a little bit more reliant on evasion for those sort of right side of the tree characters. So how does it work? If no monster has attempted to hit you in the last 3.33 seconds, you have an entropy counter that is running at any given time, and the number is reset to a number between 0 and 99. And all monsters share this single counter. When a monster attacks you, the counter increases by whatever their chance to hit is. So if they have a 10% chance to hit, then 10 is added on top of whatever the entropy counter is currently sitting at. So if let's say that it's sitting at 85, then a monster with a 10% chance to hit you would increase it to 95. Now in that case, it would not hit you because they only hit you if they increase the entropy counter to 100 or more. And then if they do hit you, then 100 is subtracted from the entropy counter, and then the process continues. So in this case, the subsequent hit would connect with you, right? If you tick from 85 to 95, that hit fails, but then if the next monster swing ticks the entropy counter from 95 to 105, that's greater than 100, greater than or equal to 100. So they hit you, and again, the counter goes back to the number 5 in this case. And as you can see from that, because the number is kind of reset to such a low value, it's going to take a lot of hits before the entropy counter goes back past 100 and you are hit successfully. In this case, it means you're going to evade exactly the next 9 attacks and then be hit by the 10th if your entropy counter is sitting at 5 and if all the monsters have a 10% chance to hit you. And so what are the implications of having a system like this where technically speaking, the chance to evade is still accurate, but now all of a sudden a given sample of hits is going to be extremely predictable? Well, it means that one of the two problems with chance-based mitigation is largely solved. There's the one-shot problem where, if you have a 50% chance to evade a hit and the hit's big enough to kill you in one shot, you're going to die 50% of the time. It does nothing to prevent those one-shots if the evasion fails. However, it does solve the problem of unlucky streaks, because with a truly chance-based system like dodge, where it's just a random roll, even if your odds are good that you will dodge the hit, let's say you have 75% dodge chance, you can still fail 4 rolls in a row, 5 rolls in a row. It's not outside the realm of possibility. And so those deaths due to unlucky rolls are basically solved, unless the hits are very, very large and kind of close to one-shot territory. Technically speaking, in that case, it won't be unlucky, though. It will be predictable. So you will never experience good or bad luck with a streak of hits that comes in, and it makes the sort of sum DPS of all the monsters hitting you much more predictable and quote-unquote smoother. And also what this does is it lets you create situations where you're guaranteed to live through the situation, where an equivalent situation for truly RNG-based avoidance, you would always have a chance to die. And that kind of reliability is incredibly useful. So I'm going to touch on some of the misconceptions and just keep those things that I just mentioned in the back of your mind. We're going to actually go through some mathematical examples and use those to help explain some of the points that I just made. But we're going to touch on some misconceptions here, and I'm going to clear up these misconceptions. So first one is that evasion has synergy with dodge. It does not. This is just completely untrue. A mixture of evasion and dodge is superior to evasion, even with an identical chance to prevent damage. Again, this is just patently untrue. Low threat monsters can make high threat monsters guarantee a hit. Now, technically, this statement is true. However, we're gonna go into why it doesn't matter, kind of the nuance surrounding it, and the sides of the story that aren't being told here. And then the entropy counter resets. So, if you've gone a few seconds without being hit, and that entropy counter resets back to a random number between 0 and 99, can result in 2 consecutive hits connecting. And technically that's true, but I'm going to explain why it doesn't matter. Why it's not very threatening. So evasion has synergy with dodge. Dodge doesn't increase the value of evasion or vice versa. The boost to your effective hit points, and when I say effective hit points here, let me be clear, I'm not describing the size of your HP pool, the size of ES life and mana if you use mind over matter combined. That's not how I'm using this term. I'm using it correctly. That's an incorrect usage of the term to describe the amount of actual damage that you can receive before dying. So it factors in mitigation and avoidance and all that. So the effect on your EHP with a given chance to evade or dodge is not affected by the opposite one. So if you have 50% dodge chance, it will always double your effective HP against strings of attacks on average, regardless of whatever your evasion chance is. If you have 0 evasion, 50 evasion, 70, it doesn't matter. The statement about 50% dodge doubling your EHP against strings of small to moderate attacks on average is always true. The only synergy that it really had is that the acrobatics keystone downside was avoided. So if you want to call that a synergy, you can, but technically speaking, the outside of the acrobatics keystone, having a combination of chance-based avoidance, like that's truly RNG, and an entropy system chance-based avoidance, they don't have any synergy outside of that. So a mixture of dodge and evasion is superior to evasion, even with an identical chance to prevent damage. So when I say identical chance to prevent damage, I mean like the net chance to prevent damage. So if, for example, if you have 50% chance to evade and 50% chance to dodge, then that means you have a 75% chance to avoid being hit. So this is not having 50-50 evade and dodge is not better than just having 75 evade chance. That's incorrect. So all that does is it increases the variability of outcomes. And technically speaking, it does create some situations where you could survive that you would die with pure evasion, but there's situations that you don't want to rely on your defenses to, like, where the defenses are already unreliable. So you're going from unreliable to guaranteed death, but at the same time, you're sacrificing situations where you can guarantee survival instead of dying some portion of the time, which makes far more sense. And again, I'm going to show you some numbers that kind of illustrate what I'm talking about there more clearly if that was a little bit muddy. Buffering hits that get past evasion can be accomplished just as well with more evasion, right? If you're at 50% evasion, it's no better to add 50% dodge than to just increase your evasion to 75%, right? It's not, again, it's just not going to boost your effective HP anymore, and we'll go into those scenarios where you'd live and die with either one shortly. Another thing to keep in mind is that dodge has no effect on critical strike rolls, and technically this has nothing to do with the entropy system. Just mentioning in this game, evasion actually can prevent critical strikes from connecting, because when an enemy hits you, and a lot of people actually don't realize this, when an enemy hits you, yes, first there's the evasion check to see if they hit you at all, but then if they roll a crit, they actually have to check against evasion again for the crit bonus damage to apply. And so avoiding that crit bonus damage actually does kind of help with the one-shot problem a bit too. but just another thing that doesn't make the value of evasion and dodge equivalent. So the idea that a bunch of lower threat monsters can make a more threatening monster guaranteed to hit, again, technically this is true just because of the nature of the entropy system where some hits are guaranteed to hit you. But the point is that you don't know which hit that is. So if you're in a scenario where there's one big threatening monster like a boss, and then there's a bunch of trash monsters around it, yeah, the trash monsters could tick your entropy counter up, and then the big monster could swoop in and hit you right as the entropy counter is about to crest 100, right? So it gets that guaranteed hit. But this ignores the possibility of the opposite, right? And the opposite is a lot more likely. It's way more likely that the big monster ticks up your entropy counter so that one of the many trash monsters surrounding it is guaranteed to hit you. But ultimately, the bottom line is that the chance the big monster hits you is the same. So the fact that this technically can happen is completely irrelevant. The other thing is that it also still prevents a situation where if you're in a similar scenario but the threatening monster isn't going to one-shot you, let's say it's a threatening monster, a boss, and a bunch of ads around it. If the big monster would do, let's say, 70% of your health, and all the little monsters would do 10% of your health, and there's 10 little monsters surrounding it, well, with enough evasion chance, you can guarantee that you'll never die if they all hit you or attempt to hit you at the same time. Right? You can guarantee it. You can never guarantee that with dodge. You can still always have a bad luck roll where the big hit seeps through, a few of the little shit hits seep through, and then you're dead. The entropy counter resets can result in 2 consecutive hits connecting. And yes, again, this is true, right? If a monster hits you and then nothing tries to hit you for 3.33 seconds, your entropy counter resets, you get unlucky and it resets to a very high value, then you can just be hit on the next consecutive hit. But in this scenario, there's been in excess of 3 1/3 seconds between those 2 hits, which gives you time for life recovery and escape. And the only other scenario where this can happen is if you have a less than 50% chance to evade. Because if you have at least a 50% chance to evade, you will never get hit by 2 consecutive hits. It will not happen. And the thing is, this can happen with dodge as well. It's just that with dodge, there's not going to be a time delay in between, which means that the ability for you, or there may not be, there can be situations where there's no time delay. And so that doesn't allow for your life recovery to kick in, for you to leech, for you to pop a flask, for you to evade, for you to pop a guard skill. You don't have time for any of these things to happen if the 2 hits come in basically at the same time. So let's look at some situations here and kind of dive into the math to really understand the implications of the entropy system. So I have 3 different setups here. A character that has 75 dodge chance, 75 evade chance, or 50-50 each. All of these, the net result is that you have a 75% chance to prevent damage. And so in this scenario, we're pretending that 8 attacks come in basically at the same time. So what is the minimum number of hits that can connect with you if you're on a character that has 75 dodge? It's 0. Theoretically, you can dodge roll against all of them. But the thing is, you can also fail against all 8 of them. Now, it's not very likely, not at all. And again, we're going to look at the math of this, but theoretically it can happen. Now look what happens when you go to 50 evade and 50 dodge. Now technically with the dodge, it still makes it so you can have a minimum of 0, but the evade is the only thing that will ever cut down the maximum number of successful hits possible. And then if you have 75 evade chance, now sort of a minimum of successful hits has been introduced, and it's set to the same as the maximum. That is, in a given sample size, it's always going to be the same number of hits that connect with you. This predictability, again, is very powerful. So now we're going to look at a scenario, and I have 3 of these slides with differing amounts of damage, where there's 8 hits coming in at you. They're 1,000 damage each. Again, the same 3 scenarios with respect to your evade and dodge chances. and then 3 HP values of your character. And this is the chance of death right here. So you can see that if you are entirely reliant on dodge, then assuming there's enough incoming damage to kill you, you will never be guaranteed to survive the situation. Now, granted, this is a very low chance of happening. This is like 1 in 50,000. But this is kind of low, but over the course of a character lifetime, you're going to die at some point. This game involves huge numbers of attacks coming in at any given time, and many, many hours played. You're going to die sometimes. This is an unacceptable risk for hardcore right here, and it is also unacceptable level of risk if you're trying to push for like 100 or something, and those 10% XP penalties are extremely punishing. And then if you look down here at the character that has 75% chance to evade, none of these characters will ever die in this scenario. None. There's 0% chance. This changes a little bit as we amp up the damage numbers. Right, so this graph looks very similar, just the percent increases, increased chance to, or percent chance to die has increased because the hits are bigger, so not as many have to hit you for it to kill you, right? But for the evade character, we're still at all zeros. You'll still never die in this scenario, in any of these situations, because only 2 hits are going to connect, right? So you'll always take 3,000 damage here. Finally, we're in a scenario where the evade character can die. And in fact, what this means here is that the evade character will die with only 4,000 HP. Now, technically speaking, you can see that the chance to die here has gone up. But it only is going up in situations where this defensive layer is already unreliable, right? You're never going to, or you shouldn't make a character where you're depending on surviving in a situation where you just die 2/3 of the time. That's a terrible idea. You should never do that. And so, yeah, technically, right, you're guaranteed a death here where you could survive here, but you shouldn't be relying on this anyway. And also, what this does is it lets you solve the situation, right? So even though you're guaranteed to die in this scenario, if you get more HP, or let's say you get some armor, if these were physical damage hits, you get extra resistances, you get fortify, you get something else that mitigates your damage or boosts your HP pool, now you're back to a 0% chance to die. Whereas here, you can only, right, you boosted your HP by 50%, yet you cut your chance to die in half, but you're still dying 30% of the time, right? So the chance is still very significant, whereas you can completely eliminate your chance to die here. So having that level of control over whether your character will live or die is incredibly powerful. So what does this mean with respect to Scourge? The changes are a little bit hard to evaluate because we don't know the details, right? We don't know what the passives look like. We don't know how much we have to invest to get boosts to our evasion. We don't exactly know what the evasion rating looks like on the new armor bases. And we don't know what spell suppression accessibility looks like, which we haven't really talked about here, but is the thing that's replacing spell dodge. Spell suppression, by the way, is a chance to avoid half of spell damage, but the difference between it and spell dodge, aside from it only mitigating half damage, whereas spell dodge mitigates all the incoming spell damage, is that its cap is 100%. So that means you can very reliably cut all incoming spell damage in half if you get it to 100%, which is very powerful. You are trading a significant boost to EHP, though. With 75% spell dodge, it technically quadruples your effective health pool against like small to moderate sized spell hits coming in strings, whereas spell suppression can only double it, right? Because you're cutting the damage in half, it doubles your effective health. But that loss of EHP might actually be worth it when you can guarantee that you don't die if you get enough other defensive layers. The EHP ceiling for purely chance-based mitigation is lowered. And the reason why is because without dodge, now you can't get that quadrupling of your effective HP against attacks. Before you could get 95% evade chance and then layer 75% dodge chance on top. Obviously, that's better than just having 95% evade chance. Thing is, only raiders were realistically hitting the ceiling. I would also argue that the uptime on it, even with the Flesh and Stone aura, is not as good as people are suggesting, because against ranged enemies, they were never in that blind aura. But raiders were nerfed anyway. Raiders were very significantly nerfed, so it was not likely that people were going to be capping evade chance or coming nearly as close. And blind has also been nerfed, so as a result of that, it makes it so that you're going to have to rely on evade entirely, and but it's like sort of okay because of the other defensive tools that they're giving us, I think. Again, we'll have to see exactly how much investment is required. Extremely low defense builds probably are punished because the amount of value you got out of 5 passive points to get acrobatics, phase acrobatics, and then get a pretty reliable blind, like mostly reliable. Very low investment for a lot of defensive power. And so for those who basically put nothing else in defense except for that little bit of investment, they're probably going to feel it because you won't get as much power with that investment, but then being able to scale it up more effectively is worth a lot, assuming that you're not just going to go full glass cannon build. Some other things to consider: there's more HP on the tree. They're nerfing the Scion Life Wheel, but there's just more HP sprinkled around the tree. Hybrid setups are going to be better. Ghost Dance is available to everybody now for evasion energy shield setups, and armor evasion is going to be a much more realistic proposition too, because the power of armor got significantly boosted. The equation changed so that armor is a lot more effective. The Temporal Rift skill, which will kind of take a snapshot of your life at any given time, and then when you pop the skill, will kind of like rewind what your life is currently at back to a previous state. And so that's really powerful with something like evasion, because when the strings of incoming hits, when you can guarantee that you're going to evade the next several hits, it gives you time to react with something like Temporal Rift. Grace got buffed, which, in addition to the equation which calculates your chance to evade getting changed so that every point of evasion rating has more value, you're just going to get more evasion rating from your gear, and now potentially from this aura as well. And the changes to reduced mana reservation mean that it's going to be easier to spend the mana reservation sort of availability on Grace. Also, shields got buffed, and shields can plug in that gap because block basically does the same thing that dodge did. But also now the extra evasion rating is going to have more value. Spell suppression is available on the shield slot, and so I think shields are going to be seen on evasion builds a bit more. And so let's go ahead and wrap it up here. I have closing thoughts. Some things to summarize, key points to remember. Just be aware that when people make comments on the entropy system and talk about how it's bad, they tend to focus in on an extremely specific scenario and turn all the dials and pull all the levers so that things look really bad, but they're usually ignoring the other possibilities in that scenario. And they're also not looking at things sort of over the lifetime of a character, which is really what matters. Not, oh, this one situation sounds bad, but even then, like I said, they're typically ignoring the other possibilities. Death in scenarios that are guaranteed hits is a solvable problem for evasion, right? For an evasion-based build where you're using the entropy system, because you can turn a situation where you're guaranteed to die into a situation where you'll never die if you just either get more evasion or you get enough HP or actual true mitigation to prevent death in that scenario. You can get it to 0 rather than with dodge, you can't truly solve that problem. You can only decrease your odds of dying. The entropy system makes monster damage more respectable, and just sort of as a way to think about this, we all hate those rotating buffs, right? We don't like rotating offensive and defensive buffs. People complain about them all the time. I say collectively we, because it's a common complaint. So effectively what you're saying, if you're introducing more randomness into your chance to evade, is that you're okay with monsters basically having rotating buffs where they do more damage for periods of time or less damage for periods of time, because that's effectively what happens when you have lucky or unlucky rolls. So why would you ever want to give the enemy a rotating buff, or basically a rotating debuff on yourself, right? Or rely on defense that is only up part of the time? It doesn't make any sense to me. And then just kind of as an overview, I think extremely high or low investment characters probably do lose survivability in this patch. So people that had 80, 90, 95% evade chance and maxed out dodge and all that kind of stuff, they are potentially going to be hurt a little bit by this change, but they probably weren't that close to dying anyway, assuming they didn't sacrifice too much health to get there. Maybe they can make up for it with health or other defensive layers. And then again, those characters that just use those incredibly efficient, low investment, high return options of acrobatics, phase acrobatics, and blind, they'll probably be hurt by this a little bit. So that's pretty much the summary. Those are my thoughts on it. Hopefully that clears up some things, and I wish everybody the best of luck in Scourge League.